Ugh, weddings. You know, just close your eyes for a second and picture it with me.
Oh, the whole fairy tale.
Exactly. The string quartet is playing softly in the background. The floral arrangements are just absolutely flawless, like cascading down the aisles. You've got your friends and family looking on with tears in their eyes.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It is. The vows are spoken, promises of unconditional love forever and always. It is pure, unadulterated romance, right? Cough, excuse me. But, and I'm saying this as quietly and seriously as I can, underneath the veil, it's just a contract.
It really is.
Mm.
And, as jarring as that sounds when you're like picking out table linens, it is the most necessary reality check anyone can have before walking down that aisle.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a very specific mission today, which is we are stripping away the fairy tale. We are looking past the romance, the incredible catering, and the emotional high of the wedding day to examine the cold, hard legal reality of marriage. Specifically, we are comparing the stark, frankly shocking, differences between marriage in the Philippines and marriage in the West, places like the US, Canada, or the UK.
Right, because the geography changes everything.
Exactly. Because depending on where you sign that piece of paper, the rules governing your assets, your money, and your literal freedom change completely. Okay, let's unpack this.
We really need to establish a foundational truth here first. When two people decide to tie the knot, they naturally feel like they are certainly, validating their emotional bond in front of their community.
Right, it's a celebration.
Yeah, but from a systemic legal perspective, marriage is not merely emotional validation. It is a binding legal entity. It is a civil contract issued by and strictly enforced by the state.
So true.
You are essentially inviting the government into your relationship to act as the third party in a legally binding partnership.
Right, it's like you're creating a tiny corporation of two, and the state is suddenly your board of directors, which completely shifts the power dynamic.
Absolutely it does.
I mean, in a normal corporation, if the partners hate each other, you liquidate your shares, dissolve the LLC, and just walk away. But if the state is on the board of your marriage, they dictate the terms of dissolution. Which brings us to the termination clause of this contract.
The big one.
Yeah, how binding is this document once the ink is dry?
Well, the contrast here represents arguably the most dramatic legal divide in modern family law. Let's look at the Philippine system first, because it is an outlier on the global stage.
And when we say outlier, we mean an absolute anomaly. I mean, the Philippines is the only populi country in the entire world aside from the Vatican where divorce is completely illegal.
Yeah.
It isn't just frowned upon culturally, it is explicitly enshrined in their constitution as an inviolable social institution.
Right. And that phrasing, inviolable, is the key to understanding the entire legal framework. The state views the marriage bond as something that fundamentally cannot be broken by mere human desire or like contractual disagreement. Wow. It is built on a philosophy of absolute preservation. The institution supersedes the individuals within it.
That is heavy.
It is. Once you get married under Philippine law, your legal status changes permanently, and the state's primary directive is to protect that union at all costs.
I have to admit, my heart rate is genuinely spiking just thinking about this. So the exit door is virtually welded shut.
Basically, yes.
It's like a subscription service you can literally never cancel. But realistically, I mean, human beings are flawed. People change. Situations can become incredibly toxic or dangerous. If the state refuses to acknowledge divorce, how on earth does anyone get out of a broken system?
Well, if the relationship fails, your only domestic recourse in the Philippines is an agonizingly expensive, heavily scrutinized, and highly uncertain legal process called an annulment, or a declaration of nullity.
Wait, I want to pause there because a lot of people conflate annulment with divorce. They think it's just, a divorce with a more religious-sounding name. But mechanically, they're entirely different beasts, right?
Oh, completely different.
Okay.
A divorce acknowledges that a valid legal marriage existed, functioned for a time, and then legally ended.
Right.
An annulment, or a declaration of nullity, requires you to legally prove that the marriage was structurally void from the very first day.
From day one.
Exactly. You are asking the court to declare that a valid marriage never actually took place.
But how do you possibly prove that after, say, 10 years of living together and having kids, you can't just say, oops, we made a mistake?
You can't. And that is where the mechanics get incredibly invasive.
Yes.
Most of these cases rely on proving something called psychological incapacity under Article 36 of their family code.
Wait, psychological incapacity?
Yes. You have to bring in clinical psychologists and psychiatrists to testify.
Oh my gosh.
You have to gather character witnesses from your past, all to prove that at the exact moment of the wedding, one or both parties were afflicted with a grave, incurable psychological condition that made them completely incapable of understanding or fulfilling the essential obligations of marriage.
Phew. So you aren't just arguing that you fell out of love. You are legally pathologizing your partner or yourself just to escape the contract.
Exactly. You are constructing a massive psychological profile for the court, and it's an incredibly high bar to clear. It can take years and cost a fortune.
That sounds like a nightmare.
But here's the most striking part. The state actively fights you.
What?
The Solicitor General's office, the top lawyers representing the Republic, are legally mandated to intervene in these cases to try and save the marriage. They will cross-examine your psychologists and argue against your annulment to protect the sanctity of the institution.
That is just staggering. You are literally fighting the entire machinery of the state just to untangle your own life. Now, if we cross the ocean and look at the West, the philosophy is completely inverted.
It is. In Western countries like the U.S., the U.K., Canada, marriage is treated fundamentally as a civil contract, rooted in individual autonomy, rather than an inviolable institution.
And this shift in philosophy completely changes the mechanics of the exit strategy. Because in the West, you don't have to hire a team of psychiatrists to prove your spouse is fundamentally broken. We have what's called no-fault divorce.
Exactly. Historically, even in the West, you had to prove fault, like adultery or abandonment, to get a divorce.
Right, like in the old movies.
Yeah, but the legal system evolved to recognize that human partnerships sometimes just naturally fail, and forcing people to stay in a dead marriage serves no public interest. So today, you simply declare to the court that there are irreconcilable differences.
It's a recognition of individual agency. You're telling the state, hey, this partnership is no longer viable, and the state says, understood, let's begin the liquidation process.
Precisely. Because the Western legal system acknowledges the reality of failure, the court doesn't waste resources trying to force you to stay together. Instead, its entire focus shifts to the mechanics of a clean exit.
Which means money and kids.
Right. The equitable distribution of assets, calculating spousal support based on earning capacity, and structuring sustainable co-parenting agreements. It's a system built on pragmatism and flexibility. This raises an important question, though, regarding how these two drastically different views on permanence impact a couple's financial reality from day one.
It really does, because if the Philippine system welds the exit door shut and the Western system keeps it unlocked, how does that foundational difference impact your actual money? Because if the state won't let you leave, I have to imagine they treat your bank account very differently.
You've hit on the exact friction point. This is where we get into default property regimes. And for many people, especially those entering cross-cultural marriages, the mechanics of this are a massive, often terrifying shock.
Okay, we need to talk about absolute community of property. That is the default law of the land in the Philippines. And honestly, I am genuinely getting sad. Like, I could literally cry right now, mourning for my hypothetical savings, just thinking about this.
It is a profound financial commitment.
Okay.
If you get married in the Philippines and you do not sign a highly specific prenuptial agreement before the ceremony, you are automatically enrolled in the absolute community of property regime the exact second you say I do.
Okay, think about your own life for a second. Let's say you spend 20 years grinding. You build a highly profitable tech company from the ground up. You buy a beautiful house. You have a robust stock portfolio that you've carefully managed.
A lot of hard work.
Exactly. You meet someone, you fall in love, you sign that marriage contract, and instantly, by default, half of your life's work is legally absorbed. It merges into a 50-50 single mass of shared wealth.
That's right. Under absolute community, the line between past and present is erased. Everything you owned before the marriage and everything you acquire during the marriage instantly becomes conjugal property.
Wait, hold on.
Your premarital house, it now belongs to both of you equally.
Are you serious?
The business you built for 20 years before you even knew your spouse existed, they now hold a 50% legal stake in it. It is a total retroactive financial fusion.
Haha, well, what? I'm sorry, but structurally, the state instantly dilutes my equity by 50% without any separate compensation. That makes me so unbelievably angry. How does any legal system justify essentially confiscating decades of independent wealth?
Well, you have to look at it through the lens of their constitutional philosophy. If the state views the family as the inviolable fundamental unit of society, then the wealth of that unit must be completely unified to ensure its survival.
So they force you together financially.
Yes, the state wants to eliminate financial leverage between spouses. There is no mine and yours, there's only ours, because the survival of the institution supersedes the financial independence of the individual.
So it's an economic mechanism designed to enforce the inviolable bond. You can't leave, and you also literally can't afford to leave because your individual financial identity no longer exists.
Exactly. Now, compare that mechanism to the West, where the default regimes are far more protective of the individual. Most Western jurisdictions operate under rules known as equitable distribution, or in some places, community property.
Right.
But they have a crucial distinction from the Philippine model.
They draw a legal line in the sand on the day of the wedding.
Precisely. They distinctly separate premarital assets from marital assets. Anything you owned prior to the marriage, that tech company, the house, your prior savings, generally remains your exclusive separate property.
Okay, that feels much more fair.
The only wealth, assets, and debts subject to being split in a dissolution are those generated during the marriage.
But wait, how does the court actually differentiate between what I brought into the marriage and what we built together? I mean, money gets mixed up over decades. If I use my premarital savings to renovate our shared house, doesn't that blur the lines?
It does. And that's where Western courts use a mechanism called tracing. Forensic accountants can literally trace the origins of funds back to premarital accounts to ensure that your original capital remains protected. The Western system goes out of its way to protect the individual's prior labor.
Okay, let's step back for a second. We've established that marriage is a state contract that either traps you with no exit and merges all your wealth, or requires forensic accountants to disentangle your life. With all these terrifying financial and legal risks, why on earth do rational people willingly sign this contract?
Because the state heavily rewards compliance. The government desperately wants people to get married.
Right, it's good for them.
It stabilizes society, centralizes child rearing, and vastly simplifies taxation and inheritance.
Right.
So they bribe you. They offer massive systemic incentive to get you to sign the paperwork.
Huh. Okay, this is the part I love. Because if you know how the machinery works, especially in the West, getting married is less about romance and more about unlocking a massive financial advantage. Let's talk about the spousal tax shield.
It's powerful.
Think of this like financial watertight doors on a submarine. If one partner's side takes on water in the form of high taxes, you can open the door and let the wealth flow to the safer, lower tax compartments.
That is a perfect analogy. The financial supercharge of Western marriage is incredibly potent. In societies like the US or the UK, the legal benefits of marriage are aggressively tied to tax efficiency.
Like income taxes.
For instance, spouses can file joint tax returns. If one partner earns $200,000 and the other earns $40,000, combining those incomes mathematically lowers the household's overall tax bracket. You retain more of your own gross income simply because you hold a marriage license.
But the real magic happens with assets. Explain the mechanics of no gain, no loss transfers, because when I read this in the sources, I thought, wait, is this a legal loophole the state just forgot to close?
Oh, it's highly intentional. Let's look at capital gains tax, or CGT, in places like the UK. Spouses have the legal privilege to transfer property and assets between each other at no gain, no loss.
Which means what exactly?
This means you can hand a wildly profitable investment property or a massive stock portfolio to your spouse, and the government does not trigger a tax event.
So if I bought a house for $100,000 and it's now worth $1 million, I can just sign it over to my wife and the government turns a blind eye. But if I gave it to my brother or like a long-term unmarried partner, they'd slap me with a massive capital gains tax bill on that $900,000 profit.
Exactly. The unmarried couple gets financially penalized as if they conducted a commercial sale. Married spouses can just slide wealth back and forth across those watertight doors to whoever has the more favorable tax situation.
That is insane.
You also get unlimited tax-free inheritance allowances in many jurisdictions. If you leave your estate to your spouse, the government usually doesn't take a slice. Unmarried partners get heavily taxed on inheritances.
Plus, you bypass the entire legal nightmare of next of kin rights in medical emergencies. I mean, if you're not married, you might be fighting your partner's estranged family in court just to make decisions in the ICU. The state essentially gives you a VIP pass to bypass the bureaucracy.
Now, if we pivot back to the Philippines, the tax brackets are different, so the state uses a completely different set of bribes.
Yeah.
The structural benefits there revolve heavily around immigration, land ownership, and bureaucratic alignment.
Oh, right. If you are a foreign national, marrying a Filipino citizen is like acquiring a bureaucratic skeleton key. Suddenly, you have access to the Black Bayan visa privilege or long-term spousal
It
visas.
changes everything.
You completely bypass the endless friction of tourist extensions and visa runs. But the biggest structural perk has to be conjugal real estate.
This is critical for international couples. Under the Philippine Constitution, foreign nationals are strictly barred from owning land outright. You can own a condo unit in the sky, but you cannot own the dirt it sits on.
Which is a huge barrier.
It is. However, entering into a marriage contract with a Filipino citizen creates a legal mechanism for the couple to acquire real estate safely.
Right. The property title can officially note the conjugal partnership. It allows an international couple to actually build a foundational home, which the state would aggressively block the foreigner from doing alone.
Furthermore, simply updating your status to married aligns your data across the entire Philippine bureaucratic ecosystem.
Oh, like the government agency.
Exactly. The BIR for taxes, SSS for Social Security, PhilHealth for medical, PAGI-BIG for housing. It seems mundane, but syncing that data ensures smooth property succession and immediate family coverage if a crisis hits. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the state is essentially bribing you with legal and financial superpowers in exchange for entering their specific institutional framework.
The underlying logic is identical in both systems. The state is saying, play by our rules, and we will grant you these superpowers. Okay, so we obviously want the superpowers, but we desperately want to avoid the total financial ruin we discussed earlier. If we are going to navigate these systems, we need a strategy.
This is where intention has to meet legal reality.
Yeah.
You cannot just float into a marriage contract on good vibes. You have to be highly proactive.
Okay, clearing my throat here because I need everyone listening to hear this next part loud and clear. If you are getting married in the Philippines, a prenuptial agreement is not some cynical, unromantic lack of trust. It is an absolute, non-negotiable survival requirement.
Because, as we established, the state refuses to grant a divorce and defaults to absolute community of property. If you do not execute a prenup and the marriage fails, you are caught in a legal stalemate.
You're just stuck.
You cannot divorce, you might not qualify for an annulment, and your assets remain permanently fused to someone you are estranged from.
It's literally an administrative nightmare. So you must execute a prenup in writing before the wedding to establish a regime of complete separation of property. That is the exact legal mechanism you need. Complete separation of property.
Yes, that specific phrasing.
It acts as an artificial firewall in a system that otherwise demands total fusion. It keeps your premarital assets safe, isolates your individual debts, and prevents total financial paralysis if the relationship breaks down.
It is the only way to retain your individual financial identity under Philippine law. Now, if we look at the strategic play in the West, the focus shifts to income shifting.
Which is how you actively manage those watertight doors we talked about.
Right. If you are navigating a Western system, you utilize the legal structure of your marriage to actively lower your tax liability. Say you own overseas rental properties. You can legally adjust the ownership shares of that asset, making a property 90% owned by the spouse in the lower tax bracket and 10% by the higher earner.
Wow, so you just move the money around on paper.
Exactly. This mechanically shifts the bulk of the rental income to the lower bracket, legally minimizing the tax owed and maximizing the household's net retention.
It's brilliant. You are using the contract exactly how the state designed it to be used. But wait, I have to bring up a massive point of friction for expats in the Philippines. We talked about how foreigners can acquire conjugal real estate through marriage. But the sources highlight a massive legal trap regarding the title check.
Yes. The real estate loophole that routinely catches international couples completely off guard, often with devastating consequences.
Let's walk through this, because I was shocked. You buy a piece of land in the Philippines, the official transfer certificate of title comes back, and it clearly says married to John right next to the Filipino spouse's name. Any rational person would look at that official state document and think, great, John and I are officially co-owners. But under Philippine law, that name on the deed is essentially meaningless.
It does not grant co-ownership. Under the Torrens title system in the Philippines, if the property was acquired using the exclusive funds of one spouse, or if the documentation isn't explicitly clear, the phrase married to John is considered merely descriptive.
Merely descriptive?
Yeah.
Wait, so it's just a civil status tag, like having blue eyes or brown hair?
Exactly. It identifies the civil status of the registered owner at the time of the transaction, but it does not serve as a legal declaration of joint ownership.
That is wild.
The state's priority is protecting the distinct capital of the primary buyer. If John, the foreign spouse, wants to ensure he has a legal conjugal stake in the proceeds or the asset itself, he cannot rely on a descriptive tag.
Right.
Intercultural couples must ensure both names are explicitly integrated into the actual contract documentation, the deed of absolute sale, the internal attributions of the title to reflect undeniable conjugal intent. Otherwise, John is just a footnote on his spouse's asset, with zero leverage if things go wrong.
Man, that is intense. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've dissected inviolable constitutional bonds, traced the mechanics of tax shields, walked through default property regimes, and uncovered some intense legal traps. And honestly, looking at marriage purely as a mechanism of state control, well, it strips a lot of the magic away. But I think that's entirely the point.
It is. When you strip away the romance and the floral arrangements, marriage is revealed to be a profound structural alignment. You are legally consenting to operate within the machinery of the state.
And the choice between a system that treats your relationship as an unbreakable, almost spiritual state institution versus a system that treats it as an easily adjustable civil partnership, it completely dictates your risk profile. Which brings us to the core of this deep dive.
The necessary realization that love and marriage are not legally synonymous. One is an emotion, the other is a contract.
Exactly. Think about your own future for a second. Whether you are a modern Filipina diligently building your independent wealth or an expat navigating a cross-cultural relationship, the ultimate turning point in your life is when you stop viewing marriage merely as emotional validation or a convenient pathway to a visa or the culmination of a romantic fairy tale.
You have to see it for what it is.
You have to look at the legalities, the asset regimes, and these unbending institutional laws with unblinking clarity. You need to ask yourself, am I choosing this partner because we can genuinely build a resilient, strategic, and balanced legal entity together?
That's the real question.
Do not let societal expectations rush you into a contract you cannot structurally untangle. Set your unshakable financial boundaries. Protect your assets. Protect your peace. Because while love is unconditional, a marriage contract never is. So what does this all mean?
It means the world is getting smaller, but our fundamental laws aren't necessarily aligning. And that leaves us with a final lingering question to ponder long after you finish listening today. We have established that marriage is an easily adjustable civil partnership in the West, but an unbreakable, inviolable state institution in the Philippines. As modern relationships become increasingly globalized, how will these two deeply contradictory systems inevitably collide? What happens to a family, to their wealth, and to their future when their foundational contract tries to bridge two entirely different legal definitions of reality?
That is a heavy question, but understanding the machinery behind it is exactly what we need to be doing. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stand your ground, stay curious, and we will catch you on the next one.